Welcome to the Colonel of Truth. This is Colonel Conrad Reynolds. I'm here for another great show. I have a wonderful guest with me, Colonel Wendy Rogers, state senator out of Arizona. And before I bring her on, I just wanted to say a little bit about her. She was commissioned as a fifth-generation military officer into the U.S. Air Force from Michigan State University, where she got her bachelor's degree and then her master's degree from the University of Alabama in clinical social work. She began her career treating patients in the Air Force, mental health clinic, and in 1981, Wendy Rogers, this is incredible, became one of the first 100 women pilots in today's United States Air Force. She earned her wings at Williams Air Force Base in Arizona, and following her Air Force jet training, Wendy piloted worldwide aircraft and humanitarian missions in the C-141 transport jet for several years, and she served as a flight instructor for cadets at the U.S. Air Force Academy, and much, much more. So we'll get into all that. But welcome to the show, Colonel, Ms. Rogers.
Well, Colonel, it's an honor to be with you. I'm a fifth generation Army family, Army brat, so I kind of understand your background too.
Well, thank you for your service to our country. It's very important, and you got in at a time when it was really tough for women just getting into the Air Force Academy or flying jets. How was that?
Well, I never really thought about it. To your point, though, numerically, we only had, I think, 18 in my ROTC graduating class in 1976 from Michigan State.
Wow.
My husband, Hal, was a graduate in 1975 from Michigan State ROTC. But, back then, I think, and you can relate to this, we never thought about it being unusual or sort of a first thing to do. We just did it, and we had a great bond among each other. Earlier in the 70s, of course, it was even tougher. People would sort of not spit on us, but really look down on us. It got to the point at some times where I wouldn't wear my uniform on campus. I would change there at the ROTC unit. It was worse over at the University of Michigan, which is reputedly a more liberal campus to this day, of course, as well. But Michigan State had its roots as an agricultural college, so it was a little more big picture. And there were 18 of us who graduated in 1976. I was one of three women, and I think one of the other two stayed in pretty long. I ran into her years later, but I went to pilot training later and didn't really think about going to pilot training when I was in ROTC. I went in, as you said, as a social worker, which was a very different springboard to then become a pilot from, I would say. And
right.
I went to graduate school right after Michigan State, and you being in Arkansas, and I going to the University of Alabama after having gone to a Big Ten school, it was a culture shock.
Yeah, I know you loved it.
Yeah, I was in a house with all these other girls, and we were students at the University of Alabama, and my name was one word: damn Yankee.
Well, it's a great story, and again, you're a model for young women all over the country to see that it can be done if you put your mind to it and you work hard. And it's also a testament to, I think, America. I mean,
yes.
you got opportunities that don't exist in all these other countries, and the fact that you served our country so gracious. I mean, it's just amazing. Your career. I've read a lot about you.
Well, you're very kind. It's. I think really a testament also to the fact that women can do it all. I've been blessed with a wonderful marriage to my husband, who also became an Air Force officer. We just had our 45th wedding anniversary. We have
Wow.
2 adult children, 6 grandchildren, and 7th on the way. And so we're very blessed. They know that Grandma Wendy never gives up. The grandchildren are fairly close in age to one another. The oldest is only 12, on down to now 3-year-old. And we just visited the 3 and 4-year-old little boys in Colorado and got to meet their little nursery school teachers and, walk them to school the night to meet the teacher and so forth a couple of weeks ago. And, we love our kids. My husband and I are in this for them.
Well, I just think it's great. And I love your state. I love Arizona. I was stationed there at Fort Huachuca. In fact, my oldest daughter was actually born at Fort Huachuca, and so I know Arizona very well. Not probably as much as you do because you've been everywhere now, probably. But I loved it. I loved my time there. And of course, Huachuca is in Sierra Vista. It was a mile high there, so the temperatures are much cooler than in Tucson or Phoenix. But it was great. It was a great time. But it does have, you got to get used to it though, because it doesn't have the greenery like we have here in Arkansas.
Right. I remember when I went to pilot training and we got off the plane, I think one time, and it was like a blast furnace. And then another time I remember on one of my first flights in pilot training, and it was a T-37, which is a jet trainer. And then, of course, we would go to the T-38, which is a supersonic jet trainer, which is still in the inventory for the Air Force. But anyway, I was in the T-37 and this instructor pilot with me said, fly up that wash. Well, to me, wash means water. And I was looking out on the ground and I didn't see any water. It was all desert. And I said, what do you mean? He said, fly up that wash right there. And, they're kind of strict and stern. And I said, well, I don't understand because do you mean that line in the dirt? And he said, yeah. And then I realized I was in Arizona.
That's right. I got it. Well, you and I both, of course, I came in originally in 79 and Carter was still in. So you and I were able to experience what the military was like before Reagan got in and after Reagan got in. And I tell people they don't understand what difference that made as far as our morale and how people loved being in the military in the 80s. I loved it. And the same thing held through to most of the 90s. But it started going down. And we can talk about that, about the military culture now today versus what it was when we were in. But my main point for talking to you today is to find out about Arizona, about what are some of the election integrity issues you're doing at the state Senate level, and what are some of the things that some of the initiatives that you're doing to make it better in Arizona? Can you talk to us a little about that a little bit?
Sure, and it really harkens back to the United States Constitution because the Constitution vests the state legislatures with plenary, which means absolute plenary, plenary, plenary authority to oversee the time, manner, and place of the U.S. presidential election. And so state legislators often do not realize the power that the state legislature has per the U.S. Constitution. And only in the last 2 or 3, 4 years has that risen to the surface of acknowledgement among many of us. And so we need to reclaim that plenary authority. And we have tried to do that in Arizona. Now, the backdrop to that recently, of course, is the horribly stolen election where we now have Hobbs installed illegitimately in the governor's seat. And if people don't say that out loud and acknowledge it, then that says something about the person speaking. I will unflinchingly and resolutely tell you that that is what happened. And if I may sort of sidestep to talk to that for a moment.
Sure.
I've had the honor of being the Senate Elections Committee chair. And as such, we have heard detailed testimony from research organizations that show how the steal occurred. And there are many ways that it did occur. Lack of custody, chain of custody, the day of the election on hundreds of thousands of ballots. As we all know, the machines breaking down in Maricopa County, which has essentially 2/3 of our votership in the state, those machines breaking down the day of the election in 2022, the misprinted ballot images on the paper that made the machines reject the ballots. All of this happened brazenly in open daylight and just with impunity. And so we, Carrie Lake, Abe Hamaday, Mark Fincham, we all have fought this on many levels. And so I talked to Carrie Lake, and I know you guys interviewed her and got to know her, and she loved being in Arkansas. I talked to her yesterday. She was in Texas on the border there and had events in Texas last night. But we talked again about this sort of overarching subjective need to persevere. And I tell people every day, you don't know what strand of the yarn that you tug at that will eventually unravel the skein of yarn. And I would say a year ago, I would have thought, well, if I pursue this line of attack or inquiry, then I might get this result. And then I would be disappointed if it didn't happen. Now I'm to the point where we must continue to persevere, but also try everything. And that means, for example, and I'll talk to this maybe in another segment, but our Senate concurrent resolution that we pursued, that you supported me on phone calls with as we went through it with the counties. That's right. One area that we pursued. The other, of course, say, for example, is Carrie Lake's lawsuits. Now, I will stand tall with her likely in court on the 21st or the 25th, the 2-day trial, not in sequence, but on disparate 2 days later this month, where they're asking for the images of the ballot envelope signatures. And so those are critical because they couldn't have been looked at and approved in the milliseconds that they were. And we also know that the one signature compared to the signature on file for somebody was definitely not a match. And so this kind of evidence is critical for her lawsuit. I think ultimately this all may be decided at the United States Supreme Court because some of the tenets of her claim do have federal legal implications. Mm-hmm. But the whole point of this is you have to keep pursuing, because even if the judges decide not to rule properly or quell the case in and of itself, what comes out in testimony and what comes out in evidence is very damning and irrefutable. And so that's part of the reason why we keep going and keep going and keep going, because every time we go to court, we reveal more. Right. All of this was not known. Right. When or shortly after the steal. We're just now uncovering new information.
Wow. Well, I want to talk about that information, and also I want to talk about the 2020 audit and what you know about that, because I think our listeners really would like to hear about that. We'll be right back in just a minute. This is Colonel Conrad Reynolds with the Kernel of Truth. We'll be back with my special guest, Colonel Wendy Rogers. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Kernel of Truth. This is Colonel Conrad Reynolds, and again with my guest, Colonel Wendy Rogers from Arizona, Senator Wendy Rogers from Arizona. We were talking in the break just a little bit about the 2020 audit, and a lot of people are familiar with Arizona and what happened in the 2020 election, but they really don't know what the audit told us or what it didn't tell us. Can you give a little background to that for us?
Yes. So hundreds of people worked at the audit. I was on the audit floor many, many times. It was spearheaded by the Arizona Senate, put into motion really before I took the oath and became a senator. But then, of course, I became very fascinated. And I think in the month of May, the Senate president said, hey, fellow senators, if you want to go over to the audit, you're welcome to, feel free. And it was only 1.5 miles away at the Phoenix Convention Center from the Capitol. So I went over there numerous times, and I was really struck by how professionally run it was. So what happened was the ballots were recounted, but also the imagery was looked at and compared under a very accurate, close look at hand microscopic camera. Okay. Nothing was allowed to be connected to the outside world. There were, just terabytes of information stored. And people say, well, nothing came out of it. Well, what came out of it were all the inconsistencies and the anomalies that we have come to see in the data sets of information subsequently presented. But the bottom line is that the left spun it to say, well, the votes were recounted and Biden still won. Here's the deal. If you have $1,000 bills and you count them over and over again, you're going to have $1,000. However, if say 400 of them are counterfeit and you count them over and over again, you're still going to get 1,000, but 400 of them are counterfeit.
Right.
And that's the analogy that I would have you understand to do with the Arizona audit. And there was a lot of pressure on what to say and how to portray it. And so the left was able to spin it as being an ineffectual exercise, when in reality, it showed, for example, boxes of ballots that came in that they counted, that had a receipt or no receipt that would say, 870 ballots in this box when there wouldn't be 870, there might be 1,000 or whatever. So the numbers didn't match up, the receipts didn't match up, and the count, again, if you're counting counterfeit ballots, the number is not legit.
Right.
And so that's really sort of the takeaway from the Arizona audit. What I want to say to everyone is Arizona was brave to do this. Arizona and the cyber ninjas were brave to put their lives on hold and pursue this line of inquiry. And again, we come back to the fact that as long as you continue to pursue a line of inquiry, more truths will come out.
Right. And that's what this show is all about. That's why we call it the kernel of truth. And because we think you're right. The more and more we ask questions, the more and more we investigate, the more and more we start, as you say, pulling at that yarn, that one, we may get the right one, and it all comes out. That's what we're hoping for. Here in Arkansas, we have problems too, and we're trying to do our best here. And I don't know if you know about the lawsuit that we have currently ongoing, but yes. we have a lawsuit, and ours is very, very narrow. We decided that you can't read a barcode, and ES&S machines uses barcodes. That's what they count. They don't count the names that you see on the ballot. The ballot marking device by the express vote is filled with potential areas where votes could be easily manipulated. And we know that the barcode itself, again, you can't verify it. And under federal and state law, you have to be able to verify your vote. And you can't do that. So we're challenging that one aspect to get rid of the ballot marking device here in Arkansas. If we are successful and we prevail, we think that will be any other state could use that. And I understand y'all have a combination. You have ES&S, you have Dominion, and Hart Civic, correct? You have three companies operating in Arizona.
Well, yes, and as for that machine point, we had experts testify in my committee that the machines are absolutely manipulatable, they're corruptible, and we want to do away with the machines. But we have a 1-vote majority in our Senate, 1-vote majority in our House, and of course, an illegitimately installed person in the governor's seat who vetoed, I want to say, upwards of 120 of our bills.
Wow. So uphill battle until you get rid of her And
right.
Yeah, I understand. But still, you got to educate people. And
Yes.
and that's why we started.
And it's my job to put legislation forward regardless, Conrad, just
Right.
as you say, because that's what my voters voted me in for.
Right. And the more you do that, the more and more people become educated. They find out what's going on. The hearings that you're having, incredible. That's what we need to have more in our state, but we don't have them. They don't bring in experts. They don't bring in anybody, but we are. We're going to bring in the experts for our hearing, which will be September 11th, actually, 9/11. We're going to bring in experts in. Dr. Appel from Princeton University. We're bringing in Dr. Stark, Philip Stark, who's he invented risk limit auditing, actually. He is a brilliant guy. He's actually on the advisory board of the EAC.
Wow.
And guess who he was appointed by? Nancy Pelosi. That's who he was appointed by. But so he's not like a far right guy at all. But he agrees with us that the BMDs have to go. These ballot marking devices have to go because you can't trust it because it's a machine marking the ballot, not the person.
But he also agrees that if it goes, this is Will, by the way. Hey,
Will.
Once it goes through a tabulator, you have to keep the tabulator in check by doing a hand count.
Right. And so, they passed a state law here in Arkansas where they made sure that even if a county went to ballots, hand-marked ballots, they had to be run through an ES&S DS200 tabulator. In other words, they wouldn't get around it. So you have to do that. Okay, we said fine, but as long as we have 100% hand count afterwards, and most of our counties are small, so we're not like a Maricopa County. I mean, our entire state for our election is under 1 million people. In our primaries, total primaries, 450,000. So we can, and we have 75 counties. So small counties, you can easily count them. Listen, we're in our last 30 seconds or so here. So what I want to do is come back. We've got a couple of things I want to talk to you about. One of them, it's not really related to election integrity. I want to talk about your Hall of Fame, your Military Veterans Hall of Fame. I know you may not know that much about it, but I know a little bit about the one we have in Arkansas. And I'd like to talk, since you're a military person, I want to talk to you about that. But we'll be right back with our guest, Colonel Wendy Rogers. We'll be right back. This is Colonel Conrad Reynolds. All right, welcome back to the Colonel of Truth. This is Colonel Conrad Reynolds with my special guest, Colonel Wendy Rogers, a state senator out of Arizona. And when we left off, I had a couple of things I was talking about the Hall of Fame. We won't spend but just a minute on this. The reason I brought it up is that the Arizona Military Hall of Fame was one of the examples that I looked to when I was setting up a Hall of Fame here in Arkansas. And you guys have a really good Hall of Fame. But more importantly, there are great veterans in Arizona. In Arkansas, just so you know, 10% of our population have served in the military.
Wow.
So we're one of the few states that have, 1 out of 10 served in the military. So it was shocking to me that we didn't have a Hall of Fame. So in 2010, 2011, I got a group of people together. We formed a 501c3 and we put it together, and we honor 15 veterans every year. So, and I know y'all have a good one there too. And I just want to congratulate all of Arizona for the veterans that y'all have there. That was it.
Well, thank you. A big shout out to a couple of veterans that I know well. My colleague, Senator Sonny Borelli from Mojave County, who is a retired Marine gunny. He and I are the two senators who've served full careers, 20 years or more. And it is he and I who have been the two to go around to these other counties to promote the Senate concurrent resolution, which we'll talk to in a minute. Mm-hmm. But also a big shout out to my congressman, Navy SEAL Eli Crane, also endorsed by President Trump, as was I, and a great friend. I was just talking about him earlier today with a constituent who wants to do a sort of volunteer work project to restore a road out to Apache Lake. And Will, you might have even gone on this road, State Route 88. And this veteran who I talked to, my constituent, Army, was discussing with me about it. And I said, well, it's probably going to be federal in nature, and we will have our very own Congressman Eli Crane try to spearhead us being able to do this. And again, this comes back to this transcendent bond that those of us in the military share. And that is a way we get a lot done, believe me.
Yeah, and that's the reason I love working with veterans, because they understand there's a mission first, and everybody puts forth effort no matter what to get that accomplished. So, but y'all have done a great job out there. All right, now we're going to transition because you brought up something earlier in the break that is absolutely interesting, and I want our listeners to really listen to what you have to say about this presidential preference primary that you're thinking about doing. So tell us about how that works and what you're...
Well, each state does, I believe, have a presidential preference primary. Essentially, this is to determine who the nominee will be per state. Mm-hmm. So I believe ours is in April. And of course, every 4 years, ostensibly, each state has something like this. I mean, Iowa has caucuses and other states have various renditions, but we have the standard primary. Now, normally, the state of Arizona runs this. The government runs this election. Mm-hmm. Well, a few days ago, the Maricopa County GOP, this is the party now, not the state government, but the party, arguably, as I said earlier, maybe 2/3 of the voters are represented in Maricopa. So Maricopa County GOP Chairman Craig Berland, who's actually a neighbor of mine at my near the Capitol House in Phoenix on the Air Park, said in a big statement, the GOP, the party, want to run the primary in April for the presidential preference selection. And he has put the state party apparatus on notice to say, we want to do this. And so this has been bubbling up the last few days. I have come out strongly in support. Now, mind you, I don't represent Maricopa County, but of course I'm of the state and I represent 4 other counties. And so I, as their senator, have said, this is a good idea. And you might say to me, well, Wendy, how could the party afford it? The party can afford it. It's a few $1 million, but that's not the point. The point is the stipulation of how it would be run is perfect. Paper only, day of, in precinct counting. Wow. And we will show the world that this can be done.
Wow, that sounds great.
So this would take the state or take the election away from the state running it and put it back to the party to choose who their standard bearer is in November.
Correct. And the statutes allow for it because it's a party nominee. It's a party phenomenon, if you will.
Right.
And so the party can run it if the party so wants.
I think that's great. I didn't think about that, but that is incredible. Yeah. So now it's just then for the presidential race only, not the congressional or primaries or anything. Just the presidential.
Because a good point. Because in Arizona, it's August when our standard primary is for me and for Eli Crane and everybody up and down the ballot.
Right.
But in April or so is when the presidential primary is for Arizona.
Got it.
Okay. All right.
So you guys are going to have 2 primaries, one just for president, one for everything else.
Right. And that only happens every 4 years. Mm-hmm. And I think, don't quote me on this, but I think 4 years ago, we didn't even have one because we knew it was President Trump. And so the party chair, Kelly Ward, again, don't pin me down on the details, but I seem to recall her saying it's needless for us to do this. And so we didn't have one. But 8 years ago, we did.
Yeah. Well, 8 years ago, look how many people were running. I mean, Lord, yeah. I mean, we had everybody. You had Rubio, had Cruz. I mean, it was amazing the number of people that ran in that race.
And a lot of people were for Cruz back then, if you'll recall.
Oh, yeah.
I was not. I was an original Donald Trump supporter. This is a cute, funny story. Back in 2015, he came out to Arizona in the fall, and then he came out a second time in December. And it was at what used to be Williams Air Force Base, now Mesa Gateway Airfield, but it was where I went to pilot training. And so this is very special for me. And I went. And another little funny backstory, I was in the background room, the green room, I guess you could call it, because I had been asked to do a little intro. It's on YouTube, the intro that I did for him, a huge packed hangar. And Sheriff Joe Arpaio, in his inimitable way, said, "Hey, Colonel, I was Army and you're Air Force. And how many minutes do we have for our intro?" And I can't remember what it was. I think I said, "Well, I think, Sheriff, 5 minutes each of us." And he goes, "I want some of your 5 minutes." I said, "You're not going to get my 5 minutes. I want some of your 5 minutes." And my husband was like, "Oh my God." And, but that's the way Sheriff Arpaio is. And we have a great rapport and relationship. He's like a fighter pilot. You just got to beat him back down, because otherwise they'll run all over you.
Yeah, I met him in 2016, actually. So yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
He's 91, I think, and it was announced a day or two ago that he is running for mayor again of his town of Fountain Hills.
Unbelievable. Yeah. But his mental faculties are all there. I mean, at least, of course, it's been several years since I saw him. I think it's, again, 2016. But
right.
But very, very unique person. No question about it.
Well, yes. And so anyway, after we did all the intros and all this kind of stuff, my husband and I went out to the tarmac and met Donald Trump. And this friend of mine who was helping me on my campaign took a snapshot, which is now sort of this historic original snapshot of Hal and Wendy with Donald Trump in the middle with the Trump airplane in the background. And so when we were visiting Mar-a-Lago almost 2 years ago now for the first Kerry Lake event there, we were in the click line to shake his hand. And he knew by then who I was and so forth, being a senator. And so Hal, my husband, had the postcard that we had made of that picture.
Right.
And we got up to meet him and we're shaking hands, and Hal pulled out the postcard and gave it to President Trump. And President Trump looked at it and he goes, "Whoa, we look pretty good back then, huh?" and then he said to Hal, "Can I keep this?" Well, of course, sure. So he put it in his vest pocket and then signed it, endorsed it, and sent it home with Kerry Lake to give me in Arizona 2 days later, which was really special.
Great story. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, listen, we're going to take a break and we're going to come back because we got a lot more questions. This is Colonel Conrad Reynolds with the Colonel of Truth. We'll be right back. Thank you so much. Welcome back to the Colonel of Truth. This is Colonel Conrad Reynolds. We're our last segment, and we're here with Colonel Wendy Rogers out of Arizona, state senator, a firebrand. She is doing wonders in Arizona. And one of the things that you're doing is the county resolution. Tell us all about that.
We did a state Senate resolution, Senate concurrent resolution, SCR 1037, which did not require the stamp of approval or signature of the illegitimately installed hops. So the Senate and the House collaborated and passed this Senate concurrent resolution, which stipulated in 5 pages of full detail that the machines are critical infrastructure. And in 2017, Homeland Security deemed them as critical infrastructure. And as such, they had to ascribe to DoD security standards. They couldn't be infringed upon by nation-state actors who were adverse to our country. They couldn't be connected to the internet, and so on. And so this whole litany of criteria was spelled out in these 5 pages. This went through and was passed, as I said, by the Senate and the House, and had, as we saw it, the full force and effect of law. And so my colleague, I mentioned, Senator Sonny Borelli, former Marine, retired Marine, sent it out with a letter to each of our 15 counties. We just have 15 counties. They're quite vast. And said, this is what you need to do. If you can't show that the machines ascribe to these criteria, then you need to go back to paper. Well, what happened was they kind of ignored it, which we figured they might do. The Attorney General, the illegitimately installed Attorney General, she poo-pooed it and said, "Oh, you can't dictate this." And the illegitimately installed Secretary of State also essentially said the same thing. So now we were in a situation, Borelli and I, to go to these counties and at least prevail upon their sense of obligation and duty. Mm-hmm. So we went to 4 rural counties. We went to his county, Mojave County, and I thought it was well received. If you look at my Twitter, my pinned post is my speech to them. I was on fire that day, I'll tell you. We had to sit for 3 hours through the meeting first, but that was actually instructive and helpful because it enabled me to understand what their issues were, and they all sprang from an illegitimately installed executive. And so then we went to, I forget the order, but we ended up going to Pinal County, which is the vast county that I also represent between Phoenix and Tucson, through which many illegal immigrants go. Well, they go all over the country now. And then we went to Navajo County, which is northern Arizona, and we went to Gila County, which is where Payson, the Mogollon Rim, Globe, Superior, Miami mining towns are. Mm-hmm. Some boards of supervisors have only 3, some have 5 supervisors. You call them county commissioners in other states. And what we did each of the 4 was prevail upon them, as I said, to do their duty and to study this and go back to paper because their voters really want that. But here's the interesting thing that ended up happening that we saw that we didn't really know would happen, but it makes sense now in retrospect. The supervisors themselves, the elected officials, the ones who have the power to do this, are a bit reluctant, and I guess a word could be sort of shy. They've never really had to make pivotal, big course change decisions before from my perspective anyway. They would argue with me, but in the global sense of things. The people who did not want change were the bureaucrats, were the ones who sat up on the dais on the edges, mm-hmm. on the periphery, and you could see the looks on their faces when we would present. And we presented from the heart, and we showed data, we showed precedent, we showed why this was important. And we sort of had a good cop, bad cop thing going. Borelli would enumerate all the technical parts, and then I'd get up and be kind of the school marm scold. Mom, right. To say, guilt trip them into it. My kids always said I'd guilt trip them into doing stuff. And so we had this sort of way that we presented, and we watched, and up on the dais, on the panel, you'd see the naysayers, you'd see the county attorney, or you'd see these other semi-elected, in some cases they're elected, but in some cases appointed. And they'd say, you could tell they were saying, oh, you can't do this. You can't defy the way we've been doing things for years. And so then we'd try to speak to them off camera, and all this was televised live and for the archives. So we'd call them separately and say, this is your duty. You can do this. This is affordable. Well, we would say this in public. It's actually cheaper to do it by paper than to do the machines. The machines are completely corruptible. You can have enough volunteers to carry this out. In fact, over in Mojave County, in Borelli's county, they would say, well, we don't have enough Democrats. And I'd say, well, I'm from Coconino County, Flagstaff. I could get you all the Democrats you want. We'll just send them over. And so it's not that it's not doable. It's not that it's not affordable. And it's not that it can't be done in the requisite amount of time. It's because they don't want to do it. And so this is our job, is to apply pressure, to keep exposing this, and to persevere so that they do the right thing. And talk about the one strand that could unravel. One of the counties had one supervisor who was discreetly on board with us, talked to us privately, and has a ton of background information that's going to reveal a lot of fraud and corruption ultimately. And so you could say, well, gosh, you went to 4 counties over the span of 2 months, and now this one little nugget might be the only thing that you get out of it. that's fine.
Right.
That's why we persevere.
That's exactly right. I want to ask you something, because there's a problem that we're having. I think y'all have it there too. One of the groups that have been fighting me tooth and nail, our organization, from going to paper ballots, is a thing called the Association of Arkansas Counties. And so what we found out is that a lot of states, there's a National Association of Counties. And
we have one.
And they're affiliated with all these state association of counties. And they have been adamantly pushing back and basically threatening these counties, hey, if you do this, we're not supporting this at all. And now their stance to the public is we have no official position, but behind doors we know for a fact that they are pressuring, and they're saying, look, if you want a grant and whatever, then you're not going to get it. You're going to the bottom of the heap. Your county is going to miss out on a lot of funds. Now, they are a nonprofit. They're not a state agency. They're a nonprofit, right. But somehow they have all this authority, and all these counties kowtow to them because 1%
exactly.
of all the revenue goes to this organization, and they use that taxpayer money to lobby our legislators to make sure that they don't pass laws that benefit the people. For example, paper ballots. Do y'all have that?
Yes. And I'm so glad you brought that up, because I know you and I have talked about that in person or individually.
Yep.
So we see it on the business end of it at the state legislature. Mm-hmm. They come to testify in committee with all their little detailed answers to every little clause in every little bill. And then they say, we, and we used to have this joke in the Air Force, you got a mouse in your pocket? We?
Right.
Okay. When they say we, they act as though they speak for all the county employees in all 15 counties. And I hazard a guess that most of the people in the county don't have a clue what they're saying down at the Capitol when they say they represent all these county employees. In fact, I have a good friend who's a county treasurer in one of my 4 counties, mm-hmm. and she gets a newsletter from this ACO, which is the Arizona Association of Counties, AACO, and they cherry pick, which I understand. I mean, there's only so much you could put in a newsletter, but they cherry pick what they keep her and her colleagues apprised of. My friend probably has no idea all the things that this one lobbyist says on every bill in committee.
Right. Well, we're having that same problem here, and they carry a lot of weight, and,
yes.
and the legislators don't want to go against them, and they come in, and in fact, in our case, they were trying to pass a bill, SB 250, that would punish the counties to go to paper ballot and restrict some of the things, like, for example, the amount of time to count the ballot, to make it almost impossible for their larger counties. 24 hours after the election, you got to have it all hand counted. I mean, things like that. And the one lawyer that they had, just like you said, was this Association of Counties attorney who came up, and she spoke, and she said, well, we're neutral on this, but basically we're not neutral, and this is what we think. And of course, and then the people on the committee listening to her, shaking their head, and they didn't even, as you said before, it was obvious when we walked in the door, the answer was no. They were never going to listen to anything that we had to say at all.
Right.
They had already made up their mind. The gig was already rigged to vote the way that they voted, and they passed it. And in record time, they got that law through to punish counties. But I got about a minute. I got about a minute and a half left. I'd like for you to tell us whatever you want to tell us about election integrity, and where should we go? What should we do?
I think everybody needs to remain optimistic. I think that there is an undercurrent of good that a lot of us may feel but not see. And a family member just texted me this morning, and I said, things are not always as they appear. I would look to President Trump, how he carries himself. He's very confident. He's very articulate. He's very forceful and forward-leaning. They're trying everything they can to keep him off the ballot. They impeached him. They're indicting him. They're trying in various states to keep him from being on the presidential preference primary ballot. All of this is because they know that he's gathering steam, that with his mugshot, he's raised millions of dollars. The Trump store in Show Low, my district, the northern part in Navajo County, Show Low, Arizona. I just talked to the owners last night on my walk. They can't keep Trump mugshot T-shirts in stock quickly enough. Steve Slayton, who's also running for state rep for my district, Steve Slayton, AZ, great American Vietnam vet, helicopter crewman. He said, Wendy, I have 2 different suppliers and I hope we don't run out. And then he said, doggone it all, I didn't even think, but someone stopped in yesterday and said, do you have a coffee mug with the mug shot on it? And he said, oh, I didn't think of that. So now he's scrambling to get mugs for the weekend of the mug shot.
It's all over. And I think that was it's going to be, that will be telling, because you're going to see everybody wearing that mugshot. Listen, I hate to go. It's been a great conversation. Thank you for taking the time to talk to our listeners here in Arkansas and across the country. But we really appreciate your efforts. You're a hero in our eyes, and we will continue to watch your progress there and hope you come back on and talk to us here at the Colonel.
Thank you, Colonel. Yes, and follow me on Twitter, Wendy Rogers AZ.
Okay.
WendyRogers AZ. Wendy Rogers AZ. I'm on Gab, Getter, Truth, Rumble, Facebook, and all those. But also my regular website is wendyrogers.org. Thank you. God bless America.
Absolutely. God bless America. Thank you for coming on. And thank you for being and listening to the Kernel of Truth. We'll be back next week with another great episode. Thank you so much. Give this video a thumbs up, if you will. Like and subscribe to our channel. Very important for us to spread this message to everybody. And I can't do it without your help. This is the Kernel of Truth. And I'm Colonel Conrad Reynolds. And thank you for joining us.